Hey, everybody, we got a great one today, for a change. Dan Balz, chief correspondent of the Washington Post, is back with us. And as spectacular as his last one was, this one just confirms Dan's status as the second best political reporter in the country, the best being Ron Brownstein of the Atlantic Monthly. I've never had Ron on. I don't know why, but Dan is not a poor man's Ron Brownstein by any means. No, Dan is magnificent in his own right. And I think this winning, delightful conversation proves that the Al Franken podcast can more than make up for the stinkers we produce on a somewhat regular basis. No, this is a great one, and we have what I call a wide-ranging conversation showing not just Dan's encyclopedic breadth of knowledge, but mine as well. It's a nice conversation. Also, and this is a new one for the Al Franken podcast, Harry Litman, who did a fabulous podcast for us last week on the Trump trial, is coming right back to comment on the verdict. This has never happened before, not even Norm Ornstein, who in the early years of the podcast I had developed an over-reliance on, admittedly. Not even Norm Ornstein has done two in a row. But Harry did the analysis of the Trump trial last week, and now he's on to talk about the verdict. So let's go right to Harry Litman and the guilty verdict, after which you'll be treated to Dan Balz. We talked a couple nights ago, and you thought that the verdict would come in Friday at 4:30 because you were a prosecutor, and you said juries often on Fridays at 4:30 decide, we could have the weekend. It was a day earlier. Were you surprised that it came in so fast?
A little. That's the kind of fine-grained judgment that is really hard to make in a vacuum. But, I think in retrospect, we can see that what on Wednesday looked like maybe just setting the table and drawing their breath was in fact a full-on focus on the defendant, on Trump himself.
In terms of what they asked for, is that what you're saying?
So that's right. So, this was tea leaves, but it was consistent with, starting at the beginning of the story, it was consistent with corroborating Cohen as they had to do under the law.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it was, and I actually thought this at the time, most consistent with a focus on Trump, particularly because a little noticed detail, they asked for headsets as well. They wanted to listen to something. And when you thought about everything else, the McDougal calls they were asking for, it struck me they wanted to listen to Cohen's tape of Trump. So all those things zeroed in on Trump, and in two ways. First, showed him to be a liar as far as McDougal went. And I think that made him, all they needed to know he was lying about Stormy Daniels. But second, and more importantly, it was a repeated command by Trump, work through Cohen. So it both showed him as the moving force and showed Cohen as having the exact role he said he played and the DA said he played. So with that, if you think of it that way, they were, in a gallop when we thought they were in a trot come Wednesday.
Right.
And so, 2 days, 3 days, that's all consistent, but a little quick.
But you weren't shocked.
No, certainly wasn't shocked. Yeah. And, a little quick for this kind of fairly complex case. But the thing about this case, even if you're being methodical about it, you done one, you done 34, basically.
Yeah, and now the 34 counts that he's guilty on were many the same thing over and over again.
32 identical, and even the other two pretty close. So that's right. It'd be very weird if they'd have gone, if they'd split the verdict, as some people were speculating. I felt confident once we knew there was a verdict that they were going to run the table.
Now, I asked you if you saw any of the press conference he showed today at the scene of the crime. It was at Trump Tower.
Yeah.
Which was an odd choice.
Man, that guy is dark, isn't he? I mean, it feels almost to me, I don't want to wax over poetic, but it feels like biblical or Armageddon. Here is the rule of law coming through, and then here is this almost satanic figure just fulminating, basically saying this is meaningless. It's bullshit. November 5th is the real test. And of course, November 5th matters a lot, and the country could completely demolish itself. That's democracy. But this is a true and important judgment that was rendered while these kinds of hailstorms were swirling around the jury and the judge and the like. It just worked like clockwork. I'm a law guy, longtime prosecutor, but I felt misty-eyed almost about just the whole process having run as it's supposed to.
He said this. He said that the judge. He really went after the judge. He said it was a crooked judge.
Yeah.
Okay. I wonder how this affects sentencing, by the way. But with him, I don't think it does, probably. He said that the judge wouldn't allow us to have witnesses. I don't know even what that even means.
Yeah.
And he wouldn't allow us to speak. And
Yeah.
of course, he was allowed to speak. He used that gag order as an excuse for not speaking once. But I mean, he's just lying all over the place.
He's a lying liar, and the lies he told. Right? It's look. Anybody who was in that courtroom of any stripe, pro-Trump or otherwise, saw Merchan as a really solid, steady steward of the law and gave him every option. You know, he didn't testify. Now, in the courtroom, you can't comment on it. In the outside world, you know, what's the deal? If you felt this way and you were wrong, why not take the stand and explain it to the jury? But all this stuff, couldn't be more bullshit. And anybody who was there, you know, and it's a shame that the trial wasn't televised, but really gives Merchan high marks for his steadiness. The few times that he did get really upset, he cleared the court.
He cleared the courtroom. I noticed that.
He did not prejudice the jury. He's a pro of real adult judgment and maturity. And to your question of Will Trump's total, I mean, you know, day in, day out, absolute pillaring of the judge matter on sentencing. Probably not. Because he's a mature guy. But what does matter, would matter with any other defendant is if somebody is unrepentant. Has he shown that, in fact, he understands that has he been brought to heel by the law? Trump, you know, it's
quite
like
the opposite.
He would explode, right? I mean, it's just not in his DNA. And so when he has to sit down like any other person in the system, the maw of the probation office, when he has to go before Merchan, he's going to be the very picture of the unrepentant defendant, and that matters. So I expect, based on not his total insulting of Merchan, but based on his overall approach to the charges, that the probation office is going to recommend this. This is a charge, Al, that like usually you don't get much, but you could get a few months.
You said the probation office. Does he meet with them before sentencing? In
100%. He has to sit down, and you know,
I did not know
he's a convict now. So he sits down in like a grubby government office, and they ask him, you know, how he feels about the charges, et cetera, and he's going to fulminate, and that'll be in the report. And then the DA, I think, will ask for what would be a big sentence here, which is not a big sentence, but say 4-6 months. And my best guess is applying neutral principles that would apply to anyone and be unrelated to the personal attacks he's fielding every day. Merchan will give him a couple months. Now, just to be clear, no, he'll never see the inside of a cell for a couple years. So the November 5th does, loom large there. But look, the rule of law isn't supposed to solve everything or be all pervasive in our lives. That's like communism, right? It's there when you need it. It worked. It's the case that the people overall could somehow try to wipe this off the books. Fine. But the rule of law functioned impeccably just as designed under a lot of stress. That's an important and good day. It doesn't mean that we're out of the woods, but it's an important and good day.
July 11th is the day of the
sentencing. So he'll sit down with probation before then.
And you are thinking a few months.
My best guess is a few months, and just quickly to play it out legally. First of all, he's a convict now. That's got a lot of implications. He, it's problems with right to vote, perhaps, travel, all that shit. Though maybe not until it's finalized.
Would he be able to travel to another country?
he'll have to ask permission. And presumably Merchan will give it. But anyway, he'll go through this process, appeal here, and he's got an
Europe
appeal of right.
welcomes former President Trump today.
Exactly. And here's my note from the judge, I can go. But, in the trial, he let him go to Barron's graduation. He didn't let him go to the Supreme Court argument, right? It's up to Merchan. Anyway, and Merchan is not going to want to be a dick about it. He'll very much not so. He doesn't want to cause an extracurricular kind of dispute. But the point I was getting at is it'll be a couple years until the door slams on Trump. By that point, either he'll be president and trying to take a wrecking ball to the system any way he can, or he'll be a multiple defendant, probably facing, I'm not sure if in a perfect world where you were just deciding what's best for the country that you would do it this way. But he's got, if he doesn't win, an appreciable chance of dying in prison now. It's crazy, a former president.
Because all the other cases will.
Yeah, they're gonna happen. Even Eileen Cannon, she can delay, but the whole timeline, the whole crisis point of November goes away. So if he doesn't win on the 5th, those cases lie, ready to bring.
Oh boy, it makes things sense. So
oh boy,
the next thing that happens is the sentencing.
No. Next thing that happens is he sits down with probation.
Okay.
And then July 11th, he faces the music.
Okay. Well, thanks, Harry.
Thank you, Al.
Well, my thanks to Harry Litman. Now on to my conversation with Dan Balz, the chief correspondent for the Washington Post. A great one. For a change. Dan Balz, the chief correspondent at the Washington Post, joins me. Thanks, Dan.
Nice to be with you.
Now, do you insist on that title?
No.
Chief correspondent? You didn't say, I'll take less money if you give me chief correspondent?
Somebody offered it, I took it, but most of the time I say to people it doesn't really mean much.
Do other correspondents feel slighted at the Post?
Nobody's ever said that to me. No, I don't think
They wouldn't, though, How long have you been chief correspondent?
About a decade.
Okay, well, congratulations.
Thank you.
Now, you do analysis, right?
I do.
Would that be what you call? Yeah.
I do reporting and analysis.
Reporting and analysis, so the analysis part is kind of between reporting and giving your opinion.
Yeah, I'm not an opinion columnist. I appear in the news section, not the opinion section, and I do reporting in addition to the Sunday take that I write, and I write other analyses as well. I do more analysis now than I did 10 years ago, but that's the evolution of our newsroom and my role in it.
How does it color your analysis or commentary about Trump in regard to January 6th? I know that very often when I'm reading in the news part, not the opinion part, a news writer will say, by the way, Trump lost the election. We at the Washington Post officially recognize that he lost the election. Do they say the same thing about January 6th, that he led the insurrection or that he caused the insurrection?
Yeah, I think we use different words to describe his role in it, inspired it, exhorted the crowd to go to the Capitol, variety of ways that indicate that he was more than complicit, that he was an active participant in what happened on January 6th. I mean, he called the rally for January 6th.
What did he say? It'll be wild, right?
It'll be wild, right.
And then he told him to go over there and fight. And then he was going to go over there, but they wouldn't let him over there. And then he waited 3 hours while he's watching it on TV.
Right.
So that to me is something that I want to direct your news division to make that very explicit every time you mention it.
I would say we do.
You want to pass that up to the, yeah.
I'll let them know.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll let them know.
Thank you. Good. Al Franken said that. I read your last piece and it scared me because you said there are more registered Republicans than Democrats. Is that what I got out of that?
No, it's not
like
registered.
1%.
It's not registered Republicans. This is in polling when you do a poll,
I see.
and
I
you're
see.
getting
I
the
see.
demographics, you ask people, do you identify with the Republican Party or the Democratic Party or neither?
Okay, I read that wrong. Does that
And
surprise
I mean,
you?
it's a common, because there are any number of states that don't register you by party.
Mhm.
You just register.
So this is in polling.
Yeah, it's how people say they identify.
Now, this scared me.
Well, probably, as a Democrat, it should worry you, because this was something that was pointed out by Bill McInturff, who's a Republican pollster. And I've known Bill and worked with Bill for many years, and he's a very solid pollster. And he's part of the team, his firm and the Hart Research Associates, a Democratic firm, combined to do the NBC News polling. And this is all data that's drawn from the NBC polls. What he noticed is that for the first time in a long time, as he put it, the lines crossed, that there were 41% combined recent polling indicated that they identify as Republicans, 40% for Democrats.
I see. Okay.
We took the stuff back 8 years, which is kind of the beginning of Trump. And the Democrats had a lead of, 6, 7 points.
7 points, something like that.
And now it's gone.
What's scary about this to me is it seems that I think the reason the margin was 6 or 7 points before was that a lot of Republicans became never Trumpers and stopped identifying as Republicans. Is that right?
Well, I think that's partly right. But that 2016 polling was really at a point when Trump was coming onto the scene. I mean, he hadn't.
Right. And people hadn't really determined that being a Trumper was as bad as they later did.
Yeah. And historically, the Democrats have had an advantage in the way people have identified. I mean, it's been rare. I think Bill said one of the few times where the Republican self-identification of party ID went ahead of the Democrats was just before the 94 election, which is, was a big victory congressionally for Republicans. That's when they took over the House.
That was the Clinton midterm, the first midterm.
Yeah, Republicans won the House for the first time in 40 years.
Yeah.
The Gingrich. Yeah, it was the Gingrich election.
The Limbaugh revolution.
So it doesn't happen very often. And, we'll have to watch it and see what happens through the course of the year. But Bill's feeling is that there are two causes of this. One is that Trump has kind of rearranged the electorate. And we know he's rearranged the Republican Party, and that there are more white working class voters who now identify as Republicans than did in the past.
I see that a higher percentage of Democrats are liberals, and that might just be because we lost the working Democrats.
Yeah, that could be part of it. Bill's other view is the perceptions of Biden's presidency have also moved people toward the Republican Party and away from the Democratic Party. That the negative perceptions of his presidency.
Yeah, and that was Bidenomics, like pushing Bidenomics, kind of a mistake.
Mistake, maybe not, but effective, no. But you can say that about a variety of things that Biden folks, or whether it's the White House or the campaign team, have tried to do over the last 18 months that just haven't really, moved the needle much at all. I mean, this is a pretty static environment that we are in and have been in. If you feel that you have a good record on the economy, let's put inflation to the side for a minute. We'll probably come back to it, but the jobs are good. The low unemployment rate. We didn't go into a recession.
Yep.
The American economy is the strongest of any of the major economies in the world. That's a story that they think people ought to know more about, and believe that the more people heard about that and learned about that, the more it would accrue to Biden's benefit, but it didn't do much.
They don't buy that we didn't go into a recession, because that's like the Fed talking. Look what we did. We hiked interest rates to bring down inflation, and we didn't go into a recession. And everyone said we would. What a great miracle. And that.
But people feel the effect of the higher interest rates, right?
That's in housing, and if you want to buy a house now, that's means you can buy less house.
Right. Yeah.
And they also see inflation in food and in rents and gas. So they aren't buying.
I saw something interesting recently, and I can't recall where it was, but that, there's the kind of official definition of what inflation is, which is that prices are rising, prices are going up. And then there's the household definition of inflation, which is, as somebody put it recently, things just cost too much, right?
Right.
That's more politically salient than the exact inflation rate, because the inflation rate today is not as high as it was a little more than a year ago, but prices are still going up.
When it was 9%, I think people were in shock.
Yeah.
Because that hadn't happened since, the Carter-Reagan period, the early Reagan period, the late Carter period.
Right. Yeah.
And that was done to bring down inflation. The interest rates just went way up, but that's because inflation was higher than it is now, than it was at the peak here, which was 9%. But it freaked people out because that's how many years ago? That's 1975.
Right.
50 years
45, 50 years ago. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So people didn't expect this, and it's hurting Biden.
Yeah, it definitely is, and it's significant economic fact on most people than the jobless rate, even though the jobless rate is just historically low and has been.
And pay has been going up, but not enough to mitigate inflation.
And there are other things that have gone up. The cost of car insurance is way up, and that's whatever factors. I don't know what it is, but I don't know about your car insurance, but mine went way up like a year ago.
I'm living in New York City now, and I got rid of my car.
Oh, well, you don't have to worry about that then.
Yeah. You think the verdict in this, as we're speaking, the arguments are from the defense and the prosecution are about, I think the defense is happening and the prosecution is about to happen.
Right.
Do you think a verdict in this thing will make any difference?
Based on everything we have seen to date, I am quite skeptical that it will have any material impact on the election. It might cause a blip one way or the other. And that's the other unknown.
Well, also, if he's acquitted, it could cause a blip the other.
Yeah. Yeah. So the only thing that so far that all of the legal entanglements that the former president's in, the only thing that it's done is that it rallied the Republican Party around him and made it impossible for any of his challengers in the primaries to get any real traction. It has not affected kind of the way the state of the general election looks. So you'd have to say it would be surprising if it had any significant effect, but we've never had anything like this. So
no, but the three other trials aren't happening in time for the election. That's pretty clear, right?
That's pretty clear, yeah.
And it seems like the Supreme Court really did a number on the January 6th trial. The immunity issue.
Yeah, the delay in taking it up. They are obviously not in a rush to issue that ruling. So, the supposition is that it'll come at the end of the term, which is, the end of June. And the oral argument as it unfolded seemed to suggest that enough of the justices were looking for a way.
Partial.
Yeah, some
immunity.
partial situation.
Which may send it back to the, Judge Chutkan, and then who may have to send it back up to the appellate court. And Alito and Clarence Thomas, what are the chances of them accusing themselves because they've been asked to?
Well, it seems to me they would have recused themselves already. If they've gone through the oral argument, it's hard to imagine that they're going to not be part of the final
so it's
ruling.
Zero, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
I think that ship sailed, but we'll see.
And do you think they delayed it on purpose? I don't know.
I don't know how to read their minds. Let's say they delayed it on purpose. Did they delay it on purpose for political reasons because it would be helpful to Trump? You could make that argument, but you can't prove it. Did they delay it simply because they think, as some of the justices said during oral argument, they have to think about not just this moment, but future presidencies and have to, weigh all of that, which has the practical effect of delaying a ruling and therefore making it quite unlikely that trial.
The arguments got kind of absurd. I mean, we heard that argument about killing a political rival. Would that be okay?
Yeah.
And no one said absolutely not. It didn't seem, did it?
I guess not.
Right. That's I know you didn't follow every court isn't your exclusive beat.
Not no. Well, we've all become court watchers in ways that we weren't in the past. It was like during Bush v. Gore, right? I mean, that 37-day battle over the Florida vote, we all became court reporters because 2/3 of what was going on were legal battles, but I'm not a court expert. So
that was amazing. Al Gore is different than Donald Trump. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I think we could agree on that.
The Time Magazine interview with Trump, did any of that scare you?
I mean, I don't know if scare is the right word.
Concern you?
Yes, certainly. I mean, when you say scare, I think that's a different word, but a concern because, he laid out pretty clearly the priorities he claims he would have if he won the election in November. And those would move the country in the direction of a much more authoritarian chief executive than we have had, even than we had when he was the president 4 years ago. So, yeah, I think that's right.
It feels like he's that the right wing Republicans in Washington and around the country are planning far ahead for this administration.
Yeah, I think that's pretty clear. I mean, there's just a lot more work that's going on a policy front by people who would like to be part of the administration. I mean, one of the interesting things, Al, is that every time people were writing stories saying Trump world is planning this or that for a second term, in your words, the scariest stuff, would be printed. And then the Trump political campaign would weigh in and say, nobody should take any of this as coming from Donald Trump. This is people speculating about what they would like to see, but this is not official policy. I mean, they basically trying to distance themselves from it. The Time Magazine interview kind of, put the lie to that. I mean, he was pretty explicit about things and didn't hedge. And, so the question is, these are the things he claims he would like to do. A, would he really do it? B, would he have people around him who are capable of doing it, able to do it? But you have to take people at their word when they say this is kind of the agenda.
I mean, why would he say these things unless he planned to do them? Because politically they're worrisome, but maybe politically he knows what he's doing, and politically he's energizing his base, saying, "Oh, good, we're going to deport 11 million people."
Right. I mean, some of it may well be for exactly the purpose you're talking about, which is to energize people to make sure they come out. How would you deport 11 million people, right? I mean, that's just as a practical matter.
Well, he'd deploy the U.S. military, he says.
Right.
Both at the border and inland. You can't do that, can you?
Well, no, I don't believe you can legally. But again, put that aside. Can you imagine the U.S. military going into every community in this country and seeking out people who are undocumented and then rounding them up and just the morality is obviously a very significant aspect of this, but the practical piece of it also is it's not legal. Well,
so his announcing that I'm going to do stuff that isn't legal is in itself, whatever you're talking about, is in itself frightening.
Right. But then the question is, why doesn't that have a more significant effect on the state of the race between Trump and Biden? That's the continuing question. We're watching for any sign of change.
Well, a lot of this polling I saw in the earlier part of our discussion, Biden's the confidence in him and his strength, et cetera, it seems to be going down.
Yes, or certainly not going up. And if you're where he is, you need it to go up. And
Trump is polling higher in some of those aspects, even though he's 78. But I think there's a perception of Biden is that he's old.
Oh, there's definitely that. But I think it's more than old. I think it's a question of kind of strength and capacity, in a second term. That worries Democrats as well as Republicans. It worries Democrats who are clearly going to vote for him, but still, worry that, he'll be 82 right after the election and therefore would be 86 if he served out the term.
Right. And the trend line in terms of his vitality has not been encouraging.
Yeah. I think neither Trump nor Biden is as, however you want to put it, they're not as sharp as they were 8 years ago. They've both lost something. It doesn't mean that Biden isn't competent to be president. And it doesn't mean that Trump doesn't have the energy to be president. Trump is saying things that are, wilder and stranger.
Yeah, I almost think they should. I'd like the CNN to go back to broadcasting his speeches because they're crazy.
Oh, because you think that would? Well, that's an interesting point. Yeah, he may be benefiting from the fact that he's not getting the attention he once did.
Yeah, I do because I've been watching them and they're crazier than they were in 2016.
Yeah, I think that's right. I've wondered, again, this is pop psychology, but I've just wondered what the impact of this trial has had
on his head.
Yeah. It's a long time to be in the courtroom. He certainly does face the distinct possibility that he will be convicted. He may dismiss it. He certainly will dismiss it.
If he's convicted, he will dismiss it and they'll appeal and they'll.
Right. But does it have an effect kind of on his psyche and on his focus and on his thinking? And
I think it could make him more angry and resentful. Do you think?
Yeah. He seems like that coming out of the court most days.
No, that would drive me crazy. And he's cold, too. I don't know why he doesn't wear a sweater vest. I know that it changes look. A sweater vest, a little bit more like a professor or something.
You think that would do it? The kind of Mr. Rogers look? You think that would?
He'd wear the sport coat over it or the suits coat over it, but he'd have the sweater vest. Yeah. So it would be kind of a distinguished, Mr. Hausman from Paper Chase kind of thing. That's the new thing he's going.
You could suggest that
for
to the Trump people.
Well, they listen to this, so they'll get it. And don't be surprised if you see him sporting a distinguished sweater vest. So he's weighing pardons for every one of his supporters accused of attacking the U.S. Capitol on January 6th. If he does that, how is that going to sit with people?
My guess would be that people who voted for him, for the most part, would say that's good. And the people who didn't would say this is exactly why Donald Trump should never have been elected. But by then he'll be in the Oval Office. But
saying it in the beginning could give people a little pause, maybe, hopefully.
Well,
he would, at his personal discretion, withhold funds appropriated by Congress. Is that like what he did with Zelensky, with the weapons?
Well, I guess that's a version of it. It would be his own version of a line item veto, I guess.
And is there any precedent to that?
No. I don't think he's able to do that.
Well, that's what's going to be interesting because he's saying he wants to do things that he would not be able to do. He would let red states monitor women's pregnancies and prosecute those who violate abortion bans. I suppose that's consistent with their abortion bans, right?
Well, I don't know that that's been fully tested.
What does that mean, monitor women's pregnancies? Does that mean you go to their obstetrician and say, when did she come here and how far along is the fetus? If they have a 6-week thing, if they have a 15-week thing, I guess that's what he's talking about. But he keeps saying that it's up to the states and everybody's happy with that. I don't think Kate Cox was so happy about that. She was the woman who had a fetus that wasn't viable and had to leave the state, and the Supreme Court turned her down there, which is amazing if you think about that, right?
Yeah. Since the Dobbs decision, abortion's been the most potent political issue that the Democrats have in their quiver.
Well, how much is Gaza cutting into that?
Some, but it's indeterminate at this point about how much that will truly affect. We don't know where that war will be in September and October. We don't know if what happened on the campuses will reconstitute itself in the fall.
Mm-hmm. And that depends a lot on where that is.
Right.
Do you think that Biden played this wrong? Because I do. I think that it was clear in, early January or middle January that they were doing indiscriminate bombing and killing too many civilians, and that Biden should have acted sooner to try to put some kind of pressure on Netanyahu.
My guess is that he thinks he has been trying to put pressure on Netanyahu.
Behind the scenes?
Well, yeah, behind the scenes. I mean, we don't know what those conversations are really like. We don't know how,
right.
How stiff he's been. He may think he's been stiffer than he actually was. And we know that throughout his career, he has been steadfast, in his support for Israel. He's conflicted on that. They've tried to walk that line, but it feels as though they've been a step behind where events are and where public opinion is about what Israel has done in the war. I mean, just witness this attack that killed, 30 civilians, Palestinians, which the Israeli Defense Force says was a tragic mistake. But it was one more example of kind of the indiscriminate nature of the war that they've tried to wage.
I think Netanyahu is kind of a evil son of a bitch. If that's too strong?
Well, I don't know. Al, you're a politician. You say things. But I think he's much more partial to Donald Trump than to Joe Biden or the Democrats.
Well, that's what's so interesting about this, which is I think you're right on that, and I think so is our RFK Jr. more attuned to Netanyahu than Biden. So the irony here is that Biden is the one losing votes over support for Israel, while the other two are probably much more hawkish. And the Republicans are having these show trials in Congress, bringing people forward from the education community, from higher education, going after them on, you're not tough enough on anti-Semitism.
Right.
So it feels like that anyone, in Michigan who's mad at Biden for his support of Netanyahu ought to think about what it means if you elect Trump.
Well, I mean, the Speaker of the House has invited Netanyahu to come speak to Congress. The Democrats won't agree to that, so it won't be an official joint session. I mean, the Republicans are seizing on this in kind of every way they can. And you're right. I mean, they've taken political advantage of what's going on the campuses. There's no question that some of the campus leaders have misplayed it, but it's a tricky issue about combating anti-Semitism at the same time allowing for legitimate protests and the recognition that public opinion can hold kind of two views at once. One, that there should be a forceful pushback against anti-Semitism, but at the same time, not condoning what Israel has done in all cases in conducting the war in Gaza, and support for Palestinian rights and the Palestinian people. Al, this issue better than I, but I mean, the Middle East is it is such a fraught issue. And this has been a moment in which it has been made kind of all the more difficult for a lot of people to try to figure out exactly how they come down on different aspects of it and how you square those circles. So
a lot of people are like me, are just saying, have a ceasefire. And of course, Israel is saying, no, we got to go get the remaining Hamas folks. And also Hamas won't release the hostages. It's complicated and it's tragic. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah. And I mean, the hostage piece of it is a not insignificant piece. I mean, if you think of those families who are worrying and wondering and, fearful that, their relatives who were taken on October 7th may not even be alive at this point. And how do you get them out and all of that? That's why I say there's so many layers to this one that are more complicated for people to sort out.
Because if you're exchanging and there aren't that many to exchange because they've died in one way or another.
Yeah. And then what do you give up in return? And
In return, it would be a lot more of their hostages that we have. They're prisoners.
They're prisoners, yeah,
have.
sure.
But I think that the Hamas leaders think that the hostages are their protection. If they surround themselves with those hostages.
Yeah.
So Kristi Noem.
Kristi Noem. I recognize that name.
Well, it's the governor of South Dakota. It's interesting. I understand the calculation she made. She had advisors. That's what I like about this. They had advisors, and you can shoot a puppy and not tell people about it, and a goat. But I thought she was the leading candidate for vice president.
Oh, you did? Oh.
I'll tell you why. And I think Trump wanted a woman, and he wanted an attractive woman. It's a tough thing to say, but I think it's an ugly thing to say in a way, but I think that's the way he thinks. So I think she was the top pick, and then she blew it. I
have a somewhat different view based on some reporting.
Ooh, reporting.
Which was, yeah.
Okay, tell me about that.
I'm sorry to introduce that into this conversation, but
well, okay. Now that you have, there's no keeping it out.
I had a conversation a while ago with somebody who's generally in the Trump orbit.
Mm-hmm.
Part of the conversation, we were talking briefly about VP stuff. And like you, I don't know whether I would say I thought she was the leading candidate, but that she was a legitimate person on the list.
Contender.
And this person just kind of flatly said, no way, not going to be her. Now, I don't know whether this person has any insight into what Trump is thinking, but this was not a person who's off on flyers. And so at that point, I thought, well, maybe she really isn't going to be under consideration. I don't know.
Did he give any reason why?
No, did not. I mean, it was one of these conversations where we're kind of just skipping through stuff.
Well, we'll never know because she's not
going to be now, right?
No. That was just amazing.
Yeah.
Do you think Trump understands that Americans pay tariffs? This has always been a thing with me that just drives me crazy, because he always says things like, "Well, I was president, China paid billions of
right.
tens of hundreds of billions of dollars in tariffs," and of course, when Chinese goods come in, and like let's say Chinese TVs, and Best Buy is importing them, Best Buy pays the tariff,
right? And then you pay it when you buy that TV.
Right. And that way we buy less Chinese TVs. That's the dynamic there.
Right.
But he keeps saying like China paid hundreds of billions of dollars in tariffs. And is it that he doesn't know how they work, or he thinks people don't know how they work?
It's probably some combination of both. I don't know. I mean, you have to believe that if somebody's been president of the United States and has economic advisors, at least one of the advisors would say, well, Mr. President, that's going to come back onto the backs of consumers. And then you may say, well, that's all right because we want to discourage Chinese imports and blah, blah, blah. I mean, the Biden team is doing that with electric vehicles. I mean, it's been lead story in the print edition of the New York Times this morning by Jim Tankersley talks about that raising tariffs on electric cars from China is a way to bolster the American auto market, to protect the American auto market because the Chinese are making cheaper electric cars. They're kind of explicit in what they're doing. They know what they're doing. So
I guess so.
Yeah.
But we want people to buy electric cars. So even if they're cheaper electric cars. Do you remember in the debate last time between Biden and Trump that Biden brought up injecting bleach? And Trump said, I was being sarcastic. Do you remember that?
I do, yeah.
Peter, do we have that tape? I want to play that, and then I want to play when he actually brought up and how sarcastic he really was.
And by the way, maybe you could inject some bleach in your arm, and that would take care of it. This is the same man.
That was said sarcastically, that was, you know that. That was said sarcastically.
And so here's the deal.
Okay. So that was sarcastic. You know that. That was being sarcastic. Now here is when he broached the use of injecting bleach.
Right, and then I see the disinfectant where it knocks it out in a minute, 1 minute. And is there a way we can do something like that by injection inside or almost a cleaning? Because you see it gets on the lungs and it does a tremendous number of the lungs. So it'd be interesting to check that. So that you're going to have to use medical doctors with. But it sounds interesting to me.
Now that is sarcasm.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
What the hell was that? I mean, I think that's an ad. I don't know. Would that make any difference? People know he lies all the time, right?
Yeah, people know he lies and that he says crazy things. And so
that'd be funny. It'd be like after the Kennedy-Nixon debate. People know that Kennedy lies and Nixon says crazy things.
Right. No, it was not said sarcastically when he first said it. The reaction of some of his scientific advisors kind of was evidence that they were not taking it as sarcasm.
Deborah Birx was just trying to disappear.
Right. Yeah.
I remember that was
slide under that chair in the briefing room.
But he should pay some penalty for how he handled COVID, but he won't.
But he did, right? I mean, he lost the 2020 election. So you could say
that was the penalty. Yeah. But I'm talking about now, will people remember? And I think that for some reason, I think they have a different view of his administration than was the reality.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, that's also one of the stranger aspects of this campaign is that the perceptions of that presidency are better today than they were during that presidency. You know, whether it's the COVID period or the pre-COVID period, people have a more positive view of how successful he was as president or what the state of the country was. Although the economy was certainly in good shape before COVID.
Before COVID, yeah. It had 3 great years, but they were a continuation from Obama's good years, and the job creation was no higher than when Obama did in his last 3.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. It's not as though there was a sudden renaissance during Trump, but if you're president and the economy is doing well,
and you're building on the success, so things are all indications are getting better. Then COVID hits, and I suppose people want to put that memory behind them and don't want to go into the details of how he handled it. And he did Operation Warp Speed, so that gives him some kind of credibility, I suppose.
And during the primaries, Ron DeSantis tried to make an argument that Trump was heavily in favor of locking down the country and that DeSantis, resisted it. And that didn't go anywhere with Republican voters.
But how much money did DeSantis spend? I thought it was something in the area of $200 million.
Yeah, I was going to say,
it's wrong?
With the Never Back Down super PAC, which kind of imploded toward the end of that campaign, like the whole campaign. But
he was the worst retail politician I've ever seen. There was a clip from New Hampshire where he says to a guy, "What's your name?" And the guy says, "Tim." And then DeSantis says, "Okay."
And that was it.
Yeah, not even okay, Tim,
right. or nice to meet you, Tim, or
Tim, or
Tim, what do you do?
Yeah, or Tim, I'm running for president. I'm Ron DeSantis. I was wondering if you had any questions. Or
I always thought that he came out of that re-election victory in 2022, which was quite a handsome
impressive.
Victory. But what's kind of overlooked is that Marco Rubio had a similarly impressive re-election. I mean, their numbers were not dissimilar. So it was a good Republican year, and DeSantis benefited from it. But that he got into the presidential election without any real theory of what he needed to do and say to go national as opposed to being Florida. He never caught up with that.
Do you go on the road and travel with candidates ever? I know I met you in Iowa, I believe.
I do. I remember we met in Iowa at a George W. Bush rally back in probably 1999.
Yeah, it was the Iowa caucuses were happening, the Republican
I think
caucuses.
it was, yeah. It was sometime in good weather. I remember it was not freezing weather.
I think was it in Indianola?
Could have been in Indianola, yeah.
Yeah. And do you do that anymore? Do you ride the bus, or is that
I don't ride the bus,
thing?
but there's no buses to ride.
Really?
Very few. I mean, there's less of that than there used to be. There was a little bit of it with a couple of the campaigns around the time of the Iowa caucuses, but we had younger people who do that better than I can do it at this point.
Right.
I'm the first to acknowledge that. But I was in Iowa and I was in New Hampshire, and then it seemed to me that primary was pretty well over. I've not been out a lot since then because there's not a lot of kind of critical mass. I'll start to get out over the summer, and I'll be at the conventions, and in the fall I'll be in some of the battleground states. But the candidates, for example, you remember candidates during the primaries used to have charter airplanes that the press could ride on, right?
Right.
I used to do that, many years ago, and they did not during the primaries. Right now they're not really doing it. So, if Trump goes to a rally, he's not taking the press along, and it's, they're kind of one-offs. He goes to a rally and then he goes back home, and the rhythm of the campaign is different than you and I remember from, when we met 20 plus years ago.
Well, the Iowa caucuses are one thing, and that was probably over a week of intensive ground. You're in one state and the candidates are just going from one town to another, and it's easy to follow them on a bus.
Right. Yeah.
Always great talking to Dan Balz, the chief correspondent at the Washington Post.
Political reporter. That's kind of what I think.
That's
of myself.
Just a humble political reporter.
I'm not saying it that way. It's just the way I've always.
You're not humble.
Well, probably, I don't know. Every reporter has ego, so I don't deny that. But I've for as long as I've been at the Post, as long as I've been a reporter, I've covered politics, and so I think of myself as a political reporter.
Well, you're my favorite political reporter, except we decided last time for Ron Brown.
Yes, except for Ron Brown. All right. So we both have the same favorite political reporter.
Well, I hope you enjoyed listening. That beautiful music is by Leo Kottke, the great Leo Kottke. I want to thank Peter Ogburn for producing this podcast. We'll talk again next week.